Joining us now, New York Times chief White House correspondent and MSNBC political analyst Peter Baker, Loyola Law School professor and MSNBC columnist Jessica Levinson, Princeton University professor of history and public affairs Julian Zelizer. Welcome to the show. And back with us, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. So, Lisa, first off, let us lay the groundwork here. Tell us what is happening in that video.
In that video, Katie, what we're seeing is LaMonica McIver, according to the indictment, trying to make her way to Mayor Ras Baraka, who was imminently facing arrest by federal officials. And you can see that there are a couple of instances where she appears to have her hands on federal law enforcement officers. What is also clear from the video is that there is someone behind her pushing her during at least one portion of it. There is another moment, though, where you can see her lash out with one of her hands and appear to strike a law enforcement officer. The complaint that was filed criminally yesterday and unsealed today has some still photographs where the government alleges that she is physically attacking each of two federal law enforcement officers. But people are coming in and out of the frames. It is unclear who the suited gentleman behind her pushing her is. I expect that you'll hear from her defense lawyers that she was being jostled in a scrum that got out of control when there was confusion about what Mayor Baraka was doing there. And as the feds were trying to arrest him for being in the vicinity of this federal ICE detention facility. This is all occurring, by the way, in what looks to be a parking lot. And as they are going both in and out of a gate, blocking the parking lot off from the street, Katie.
So McIver's legal team says she has every right to be there. They said, as you were arguing, that they would argue that she was enveloped by a scrum. She was trying to protect herself. And she's also saying, her team, that she got a tour from agents afterwards, that they did not perceive her as a threat. She's calling this political intimidation, Peter. I purposefully put up the two images, the January 6 rioters that Donald Trump pardoned and diminished all of their actions as minor. Again, he even pardoned the ones who were very violent, the ones who got charged and then convicted in a court of law. A jury of their peers found them guilty and then sentenced to many years behind bars, in some cases 20 years. He said all of them are free, pardoned them all, or commuted their sentences. And then you have this administration going after this congresswoman. She calls it political intimidation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about the January 6 pardons is it was a sweeping pardon across the board, right? Except for a handful of people who got their sentences commuted. Everybody who was charged or even might be charged was given a pardon, regardless of the specific circumstances of their actions. This wasn't like a situation where Trump's people came in and investigated and determined that this person was overcharged or this person was oversentenced, this person really didn't do that much, or this person was just jostling in a situation like you see there on the screen happened at the ICE facility. They just simply said across the board, everybody there, no matter how serious or severe their crimes, would get clemency. That's very different than saying some of them were mistreated or unfairly treated. In this case, obviously, a lot of people are going to make this comparison. A lot of people are going to say, well, it's okay to assault a police officer with a flagpole and beat them and squeeze them in the door, as you showed, if you are on Trump's side. But in a situation like this, where it does seem like she touches them, I don't know if that counts as an assault, but you're not supposed to touch officers, I suppose. And I suppose there might be an argument to be made there. Clearly, she hasn't beaten anybody with a flagpole or, hurt them in any significant way. And so, of course, people are going to make that comparison and ask whether justice here is blind or whether justice is partisan.
Yeah, and so let's zoom out and let's take this in a vacuum. If this were a solo instance, if we didn't have all the context around it, we didn't have the January 6th stuff, it wasn't Donald Trump, if this video alone were out there and you knew nothing about the case and the prosecutors knew nothing about, just take it in a vacuum, Jessica, in a vacuum, would she be charged with assaulting an officer, two officers, for this video?
It's a great question, because we do really need to take every case separately. And of course, the decision as to whether or not to pardon is different as to the decision of whether or not to bring charges. I think what I would offer is that it's highly unusual for the federal government to bring a claim against a sitting member of Congress. This type of claim in particular, in addition to the fact, and I think Lisa laid this out so clearly, as she always does, that it's not entirely clear. It does look like she's being jostled. It also does look like she touches federal law enforcement, and she's not supposed to. But I think your question is exactly right, which is, would charges otherwise have been brought? Would she otherwise have faced arrest? And I frankly, my reaction is no, I don't think so. I don't think we've been here before. I don't think that we have seen the Department of Justice look at somebody whose behavior is equivalent to the behavior we're seeing on the screen there when they are a sitting member of Congress.
So, Julian, let's put it back into the context of the moment, because we're not living in a vacuum. Help us understand how you see this in the context of Donald Trump.
Well, for me, it's wondering why a sitting member of Congress in New Jersey, in her state, is being handled that way to begin with. It's unusual.
Why, she just can't walk in the front door because she has oversight?
She has the ability to conduct oversight. She has the ability to be there. And certainly there's diplomatic ways to handle this. I mean, the Department of Justice usually has gotten involved with members of Congress on issues of bribery, scandal, corruption, not this, and certainly not following up that way. So it's hard not to see this as part of the battle over the balance of power that's taking place in the country right now.
How sensitive is it for the Department of Justice to indict, to charge a member of Congress? What's the usual process?
Again, very sensitive. Usually you have a situation like Abscam in 1980, which was a big scandal involving videotaped attempts of bribery and corruption. The Department of Justice is very hesitant usually to get involved in
because
actions.
It's going to be seen as overtly political.
It's seen as overtly political. It's seen as overreach.
It has to be pretty clear.
It has to be pretty clear, and it's usually some kind of crime, not what we're talking about, at least from what we can see in this video.
Where do you think we are in terms of, like, on the stepping stones to Donald Trump just co-opting all forms of government and really going after his political enemies? It's hard to tell, we're like frogs in boiling water. It's hard to tell where we are. Do you have a good sense?
I don't have a good sense. He's not co-opting. I mean, members of his own party are accepting this. So this is a proactive decision by members of the Republican Party in Congress to sit quietly. That said, yes, this is an imperial presidency. That's what Arthur Schlesinger called it in 1973 and couldn't have imagined, I think, even with Richard Nixon, what's going on right now. So it's a danger zone, and I think that's why members of Congress, certainly many Democrats, are concerned about where this is going.
Jessica, there was reporting from the Washington Post the other day about the Public Integrity Unit being disbanded or severely hampered. Would that be a unit that would normally be consulted in a case like this?
I don't know, but I know it's not just the Public Integrity Unit. I know that we also need to focus on the entire Civil Rights Division, and we need to focus more broadly on the career members of the Department of Justice, the career civil servants who generally stay from administration to administration, and many of whom have either left of their own volition or otherwise. And I think that should be concerning because we want a professional force, particularly in the Department of Justice, to make these assessments. As we've been talking about when it comes to charging a sitting member of Congress, part of the reason why we're so reticent is because it looks political. We don't want just political loyalists making these calls. We want a professional workforce in the Department of Justice making these calls.
Lisa?
Well, I was going to say that according to the Justice Manual, which is essentially the Bible by which federal prosecutors live, not only do you have to consult with the Public Integrity Unit before you charge a sitting member of Congress, they have to approve of those charges. And the reason is because this is as politically sensitive as it is, you want to ensure that folks out in the 94 different U.S. attorneys' offices are not going rogue by themselves, are not pursuing political prosecutions, but there's a check against that awesome prosecutorial power. We asked the Justice Department last night, can they confirm that that's still the policy? Through a spokesperson, they said back to me, various provisions in the Justice Manual are under review. No final decisions have been made yet. But our goal is to ensure that people out in the field have the same accountability as people at Main Justice, that we're decentralizing authority. That version of decentralizing authority from Main Justice could be, in another person's description, just a way of absolving them of any accountability and allowing people like Alina Habba to do what they want, when they want without any checks.
Peter, Donald Trump and his allies spent so much time saying that the last administration was weaponizing the Department of Justice, spent so much time during the first administration saying Congress was weaponizing their powers for, ugly political ends because they didn't like him. That's why they were impeaching him. None of this was fair. And they're using that to justify a lot of their behavior now, or they're trying to claim that their behavior now is not politically motivated, like they argue the last administration was. I had a moment ago up on the screen a graphic showing a number of the political moves this administration has made to intimidate or to imprison critics or people whose speech they don't like. You have the Mahmoud Khalil case in Colombia. You have the law firms that have been targeted. You have security clearances being stripped for a number of former officials that spoke out against Donald Trump or spoke out against Donald Trump's actions. I'm thinking of Chris Krebs, who said that the 2020 election was unfair. I guess when you put this all together, how do you see this presidency, 4 months in?
Yeah, I think the Krebs example is a great one because, in fact, you saw there the President of the United States sign an executive order directing the Department of Justice to criminally investigate a former official of his own administration. For what reason? Because he refused to go along with Trump's lie about the 2020 election. He refused to say the 2020 election was rigged when, in fact, it wasn't. So in Trump's mind, in effect, he is arguing that it is a crime to deny that he lost the election in 2020, to assert that he actually lost the election fairly in 2020, which is an extraordinary thing. And you put up a lot of examples there on the screen. I think it's important to look at this holistically and collectively, right? Every administration obviously gets caught up in prosecutions that are seen as